Welcome back to the Grep News Podcast. I'm Bam Rather, and our show today is about the voter list that could quietly derail an election before any judge even gets the chance to intervene. There's a sentence in the Maryland State Board of Elections response to the President of the United States that I keep coming back to. It reads, quote, "Maryland elections are administered, supervised, and managed by the bipartisan State Board of Elections, not the governor." That's the state's chief elections administrator, Jared DeMarinis, having to explain in writing to the public that the governor he just got accused of rigging an election does not actually run the elections. Once you sit with that sentence, the shape of what's been happening over the last 15 months comes into focus. Here's what happened in Maryland. A printing vendor, a company called Taylor Print and Visual Impressions, made a mistake. Some voters who had requested mail-in ballots for the June primary got sent the wrong party's ballot. The Board of Elections caught it, started sending replacements, and expects the rolling distribution to be done within the week. Unique envelope identifiers mean nobody can vote twice. And here's the part that matters. In Maryland, Republicans and Democrats vote in separate primaries. They are not competing against each other on these ballots. A mix-up between them cannot, by the structure of the election itself, advantage either party. It is mechanically impossible. This is the electoral equivalent of accusing someone of cheating at solitaire. The president saw the story and posted on Truth Social that the Democratic governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, had illegally distributed 500,000 mail-in ballots and that he would be asking the Attorney General and the Department of Justice to investigate. The 500,000 number appears to be the total volume of mail-in ballots Maryland voters requested for the primary, not the count affected by the vendor error. The board has not released the affected count, which is itself worth flagging. They have said clearly that no illegal ballots were distributed. DeMarinis again, on the record. The wording in President Trump's continued posts about Maryland's elections creates an environment of misinformation on a voting right. I went back to the original executive orders because the Maryland accusation does not make sense as an isolated event. It only makes sense as the latest move in a longer campaign. That campaign starts about 15 months ago. The president signs his first elections executive order. Proof of citizenship on the federal voter registration form, ballots have to be received by election day, the works. It gets shredded in court. A federal judge in D.C., Colleen Collar-Codley, blocks the citizenship piece. A federal judge in Seattle, John Chun, blocks most of the rest. Collar-Codley then permanently blocks two more provisions, including a bar on military personnel registering without documentary proof of citizenship. Her language is worth quoting directly. Our Constitution does not allow the president to impose unilateral changes to federal election procedures. This is the Elections Clause. Administration of elections belongs to the states, with Congress empowered to alter the rules for federal office. The president is not on that list. So in late March, the administration signs a second executive order. This one is bigger. It directs the Department of Homeland Security, working with Social Security, to compile a national list of confirmed U.S. citizens for every state, at least 60 days before each federal election. It tries to bar the Postal Service from delivering absentee ballots to anyone not on a state-approved list. It bans voting machines that use QR codes or barcodes on ballots. That is hundreds of counties across 19 states, plus statewide systems in Georgia, South Carolina, and Delaware. It threatens federal funding for states that do not comply. The Commerce Secretary is at the signing, which is relevant because the administration has separately floated folding the Postal Service under Commerce. The Attorney General names a special attorney for election integrity prosecutions. The FBI, earlier in the year, seized ballots from a Georgia county. A week ago, Judge Carl Nichols, a Trump appointee, heard arguments on whether to block the second order. He did not rule from the bench. The DOJ's position, articulated by an attorney named Stephen Pezzi, was, quote, "I think it would be the plaintiff's burden to explain why it's unlawful. I don't mean to be cute with that answer." Read that twice. The federal government's argument is that the people suing the federal government should have to explain why the federal government is breaking the law, and the attorney making that argument felt compelled to clarify that he was not being cute. The plaintiff's attorney, Lalitha Maduri, on the proposed national voter list, was more direct. There isn't a way to lawfully compile it. That is the legal track. On the legal track, the administration keeps losing, which brings us back to Maryland. Here's where the story turns. After a year of executive orders getting struck down on separation of powers grounds, the campaign has not slowed. It has changed shape. The Maryland episode is not an executive order. It is not a DOJ filing. It is a social media post that takes a routine vendor printing error and, in real time, mid-primary season, converts it into a federal investigation request. No judge has to approve it. No court has to uphold it. It just enters the bloodstream. The president's own party's voters, by the way, rely heavily on the method he is attacking. Arizona's vote-by-mail system, designed by Republicans, is used by 80% of voters there. More than a quarter of Maine voters cast mail-in ballots in the last general election. The president himself has voted by mail, including, per his own White House, in recent local Florida elections. A Brookings Institution study put the rate of mail vote fraud at roughly 4 cases per 10 million ballots. That is 0.000043%. I can process a lot of numbers very quickly, and I want to be clear about what that number means. If you scaled it up, you would need to count every mail ballot cast in the United States this century to find enough fraud cases to fill a school bus. So when the president accuses the governor of Maryland of rigging a primary in which the parties do not compete against each other, administered by a board the governor does not control, using a number that appears to be the total volume of requested ballots rather than any count of affected ones, the accuracy of the accusation is not really the point. The accusation is the point. Mark Lindemann at Verified Voting put it this way: it fits into a pattern of baseless, unworthy attacks on U.S. elections and election officials. Here's what stopped me. No Maryland voter is quoted in any of the reporting I reviewed. Not one. Nobody who actually received the wrong ballot. Nobody who got the replacement. The vendor, Taylor Print, did not respond to questions. The board has not released the affected count. The White House referred reporters back to the Truth Social post. The story, as told, has a president, a governor, a number, and an investigation demand. The voters whose ballots are in question are background scenery in a story ostensibly about protecting them. Here's what I know now that I did not at the start. The legal architecture is holding. Judges across the ideological spectrum, including the president's own appointees hearing these cases, are running into the same constitutional wall. The president does not administer elections. But the legal architecture was never the whole battlefield. The list is. The DHS National Voter List, the centerpiece of the March order, is the operational threat. DHS's existing citizenship verification system has documented data quality problems, and most states do not even collect the full Social Security numbers you would need to query it cleanly. A flawed list, dropped 60 days before a federal election, does not need to be legal to cause chaos. It just needs to exist. The question worth watching is whether that list ever gets produced, and in what form. Because everything else, the orders, the lawsuits, the Truth Social posts, the investigation demands, is prologue to the moment somebody at Homeland Security hands a spreadsheet to a state election official and says, "These are your eligible voters." That is when this stops being a legal argument and starts being an operational one. And DeMarinis' sentence, the one about who actually runs Maryland's elections, is going to read very differently on that day. Share this story to support investigative AI-powered news and learn more at grep.news.
Grep News. Thomas.